Your
procedural
Honor, this
shortcuts,
isn't
all
fair.
brushed aside
Counselor,
as
you will
anecdotal,
maintain order.
unproven.
The court will
Until
not
now,
tolerate outbursts.
until someone powerful enough to walk in unnoticed decided to observe from the bottom up. And as the judge stammered an apology, trying to explain that he hadn't known, she stopped him gently, saying that was precisely the point. Justice should not depend on being known, respected, or feared. And she ordered the proceedings to continue, but this time under her supervision, instructing the judge to remain silent unless addressed, effectively flipping the power structure in his own courtroom. And over the next hours, she dissected case after case, exposing patterns of behavior that were impossible to deny when laid out methodically. She questioned clerks, reviewed transcripts, highlighted language choices that revealed contempt masquerading as humor. And by the end of the day, what had begun as a small hearing had become a reckoning. News spread quickly. Reporters gathered outside, but inside, the real drama unfolded quietly. As Judge Whitman was informed, he was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation, escorted out past the same people he once belittled, while the woman he laughed at sat calmly, taking notes. And when reporters later asked her how it felt to be underestimated, she didn't smile. She said it felt familiar, because long before she wore robes, she had been a law student ignored in classrooms, a junior attorney mistaken for staff, a federal judge questioned for her rulings, and every time, she learned the same lesson. Let them laugh, let them assume. Because underestimation is a door that swings both ways, and sometimes it opens straight into accountability. The story went viral, not because of the title reveal alone, but because Americans recognized something painfully real in it. The way power often hides behind arrogance. The way bias reveals itself when no one thinks it's being watched. And the way dignity can dismantle disrespect without raising its voice. And in the weeks that followed, reforms were announced, trainings mandated, oversight expanded. Not because one judge was bad, but because the system needed reminding that justice is not a performance, it's a responsibility. And as for the Supreme Court justice, she returned to her seat in Washington without fanfare, just another day of work, knowing that somewhere in a courthouse, someone who once laughed would think twice before doing so again. And if this story made you pause, if it made you angry, hopeful, or thoughtful, then don't walk away. Subscribe now, because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that in America, the truth still has a voice, and sometimes it speaks softly, right before it changes everything. Because what you're about to hear will make you question power, prejudice, and who really holds the gavel in America. And before this story blows your mind, hit subscribe right now so you never miss stories that expose truth, twist expectations, and remind us that justice sometimes wears the face no one expects. Because this is the story of the day a courtroom laughed at a black woman and ended up standing before the highest judge in the land. It began on a gray Monday morning in a downtown courthouse that smelled of old paper, burnt coffee, and quiet desperation, where people shuffled in with their heads down, hoping to be invisible. And among them was a black woman in her early 60s wearing a simple navy coat, sensible shoes, and carrying a worn leather folder. Nothing about her screamed power. Nothing about her announced importance. And that was exactly why no one looked twice. Not the bailiff scrolling on his phone. Not the young lawyers rehearsing lines under their breath. Not even the judge presiding that morning, Judge Harold Whitman, a man with decades on the bench, a booming voice, and a reputation for sarcasm he called efficiency when the clerk called the case. A minor procedural hearing involving a community housing dispute, the woman stepped forward calmly, and before she could finish stating her name, Judge Whitman interrupted her, smirking as he leaned back in his chair, making a joke about another emotional complaint and how he hoped she understood how the real world works. The gallery chuckled. A few people laughed outright, and the woman paused, not offended, not shaken, just observant, as if she were taking notes. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, educated, controlled. She explained that she was there not as a defendant, but as an interested party reviewing procedural compliance under federal housing law. And that was when the judge laughed again, louder this time, waving his hand dismissively, saying something about Google lawyers and asking if she'd gotten her law degree on the internet. More laughter followed. The bailiff smirked. Even the opposing counsel smiled politely, and still the woman didn't react. She simply asked, politely, to be allowed to finish her statement for the record, which only seemed to amuse the judge more, who granted her 30 seconds, checking his watch dramatically. And in those 30 seconds, something shifted, because she didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't raise her voice. She cited case law, precedent, constitutional interpretation, not hurriedly but precisely, referencing decisions that only seasoned jurists typically quoted. and a few people in the room straightened in their seats. The laughter died down. But the judge, unwilling to lose control of his courtroom, interrupted again, telling her she was out of time and that this court did not appreciate performances. And that was when the woman closed her folder, looked up at him, directly for the first time, and asked a single question that landed like a dropped plate in a silent room. Your Honor, before we proceed, may I ask if you've received notice of reassignment from the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts this morning? The judge frowned, irritated, said he had not, and asked what that had to do with anything, and she nodded, as if confirming something to herself, and said, "Then perhaps you should check your email." Confusion rippled through the courtroom. The clerk glanced at the judge, the bailiff shifted, and Judge Whitman, visibly annoyed, motioned for a recess, demanding to know who this woman thought she was. And that's when she introduced herself fully, calmly, without drama, stating her name, which some in the room recognized faintly from headlines they hadn't paid attention to. Then she added the title she had deliberately withheld until now, not as a weapon, but as a fact. Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, assigned temporarily to review lower court procedural integrity under a confidential judicial oversight initiative. And the room froze, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. The judge's face drained of color. The clerk's pen dropped. The bailiff stood straighter than he ever had. And in that moment, every laugh replayed in the minds of those who joined in. Every assumption exposed itself under fluorescent lights. But the twist didn't end there, because she wasn't there by accident. She had chosen this courthouse, this judge, this day, because complaints had been filed for years about dismissive behavior, racial bias, and procedural shortcuts, all brushed aside as